Hi, it's Susan from Worldpeacefull. I'm going to continue where I left off from, which is to explore power relationships and empowerment. And I thought I might start with the end in mind. So this is from my book, Everybody Can Win. I might just premise this by saying we're living in a world where it's all about win-lose. It's predominantly been dealt with in a masculine paradigm of power over, not power within. That's not to say that there haven't been diplomatic efforts where there has been a seeking to meet in the middle. There has been. But for the most part, we don't have training in conflict resolution available to everybody. Therefore, we fall back into the same mistakes we make over and over again, where we're not conscious of what we say and how we say it. We're not sensitive to the feelings and the cultures of other people. We typically believe that we're right and that the other is wrong, and that they need to be either taught a lesson or that they have to hear us because we know what we're talking about. The art of conflict resolution is actually meeting in the middle. It's being open to being wrong. It's being able to deeply listen to the other point of view with respect, not seeking to counter the argument. It is about learning about ourselves and utilizing that diversity and difference to become better people. What the world is really needing at this time is enlightened leadership. It does not need chest beating from any side. What it requires is an ability to deeply learn from difference. Because ultimately, when we step into power dynamics where it's all about winning, we negate the other side immediately when we're seeking to win. Strategy arises around that in order to reach that goal. Conflict resolution, I would put in the space of the feminine, and I'm not talking about females, I'm talking about the feminine. It is receptive. The feminine, for example, in Middle Eastern cultures would be the singing, the dancing, the poetry. It's the creative, in actual fact, which is where we unite. So to shift from old paradigms, one has to be prepared to step into new paradigms where we utilize conflict as an opportunity to know others and ourselves, and to create better pathways forward that are going to be a win-win for everyone. So I'll start with equal power relationships, which is really having the end in mind. To show up for a difficult conversation with a relatively equal power balance in play, we need to use our skills of assertiveness. And of course, assertiveness is having the confidence to say what you need to say, but doing so without judgment, just simply stating your case confidently. Goes on to say, in particular, I statements. And an example of that would be, the way I see it, I'm concerned about, I feel. If we face an attack, we need to remember that dropping into active listening for a while will calm the situation down and move it away from domination back towards equality. Now, active listening is silently listening to hear. In conflict resolution, we create a space for that so that the other party can hear the complaint or the grievance empathetically, meaning with feeling. So we're not just negotiating or looking for a weakness in the statement, or we're looking at strategically undermining that. We're simply listening to deeply hear the other. And when you go into deep listening, you start to listen for the real hurt that's happening within that other. This is human to human listening. It's very, very powerful, and it can stop wars. It can de-escalate religious conflict because the other feels respected and heard. It's one of the absolute fundamentals of peace that is seldom understood. Equal power relationships are very precious. These are cooperative partnering relationships in which two people, or possibly groups of people, can stand together looking for solutions to their mutual problems. Each side keeps their personal power intact and respects the other's space and integrity. Each will consult the other and outside experts if necessary. Each is willing to explain, coach, or educate the other person as needed. They are free to agree or disagree with each other. They accept the consequences of their decisions and take on the responsibility of those choices. Which of your relationships are like that now? So even when I take a step back from that, I would also say to those, even in a space of talking to one another, dialoguing, how are you with your own families? Do you practice respect, no matter who the party is that you're communicating with? Do you have a dominating style where you're right and the other is wrong? Do you have a partnership style which shares power? In order to build community, we have to be able to share power. These are the times we're moving into. There's a summary here, and I want to go to that first before I describe more clearly what power relationships are and empowerment relationships. Ultimate power is the ability to produce the results you desire most and create value for others in the process. That's a quote by Anthony Robbins. He was a positive thinking type person. Power may stem from emotional tie to a valued friendship, the use of expertise, position, the law, the promise of reward, the threat of punishment, the collective power of a group, and a person's ability to persuade. If your intention is to serve yourself at the expense of another person, you may be using power to manipulate. And we see this at diplomatic levels a lot. This has to stop in the future. No more manipulation, because trust is lost when we seek to serve ourselves at the expense of another. And this is one of the underlying fracture lines in the world, is the service to self. What we're not understanding is that when we serve others, we're serving ourselves. There's great wisdom in the Middle East outside of the popular rhetoric. I've certainly sat with many people. I've certainly listened to the stories of their traditions. There have been very wise teachers in the Middle East, and there is very deep cultural respect in these cultures, which we have to learn to sit with them, to deeply understand them, not for advantage, but as a friend in actual fact. Goes on to say, if your intention is to create benefits for others as well as yourself, and you use a collaborative process, your power may help you influence the other person. And I would say that to other players who are involved behind the scenes that the public don't see. Can you shift strategy from self-interest to how we can help the other? Now, I know that business interests play in this, and that typically is we just are in it for what we can get from it. And I believe this is underlying or underscoring conflict in the world. It's all coming down to money. What I want to help share with reading from here is it's not about money at all. You could say that the theatre of conflict is really the basis for learning how to communicate with other human beings. This was over and above the basic interests that we have in respect of business or making money in respect of that type of ethos. Life brings us experiences that appear to be around business, or they appear to be around power over others in order to dominate that theatre. But life brings these experiences to us to learn about ourselves in truth. This is the bigger picture, way beyond the issues that we think are important. Who we become is what really matters in all of this, and the clashing it up through the belief, even in respect of business interests or in respect of religious differences, are really masking the real purpose that life has, which is to bring people together into a space in order to learn from that difference. That's how you expand as a human being, and that's the real game here. That's the true end game. The behaviours in the power game triangle, which I'll be talking about in a moment, persecuting, rescuing, or being victim, can be transformed to consulting, mediating, and learning when you take charge of the way you use power in relation to others. Has a few bullet points here. Set boundaries with others when they are asking for too much help. Empower them to help themselves. Empowerment's not a subject that is understood. Typically, people are not wanting people to be empowered, and yet the sum of the parts is greater than the whole when others are empowered. We don't make mistakes coming from powerlessness. We're coming from an empowered position where there's no fear. Reframe disempowering language. So that's language that puts people down. That's language like I'm getting offended, or you're insulting me, or you're a this or you're a that. Whatever it is, if it undermines that other, it's disempowering. Choose the challenges you face. Personal power blossoms when you want what you have in your life. That's true. This attitude encourages your energy to flow rather than being caught up in resistance. When I was teaching conflict resolution to children, I was teaching resistance and flow. So I'd get the children put their hands together and resist. Flow was, I may disagree with you, but I respect your right to your opinion. And you can see how I'm rocking this way. What I'm doing is going with the flow. It's called harmony. These are universal flows. Some might see it in respect of the I just got the feeling of Aikido. These are the more sensitive martial arts. We've also got Taoism, which looks at energy. There are martial arts that look at how energy is used. Typically, it's about defense, it's not about attack. Self-protection, which is the wisest use of any martial art. All martial arts should be about that. Never attack. Attack is coming from a weakness when we attack others. I'm just going still for a moment. I see it as a call for help. Attack is a weakness in actual fact. And it's an announcement of fear. But it will be conveyed with armor. It will protect itself and look fierce to scare off the other party. So it's about, to some extent, bluff, to some extent not bluff, because they do go in and fight. But aggression has typically been a warning. It's to frighten people. And we want to move into a more sophisticated future where we no longer need the bravado or attitudes of domination over others. When we're in a world of 6 billion people, diverse cultures, we actually live in the most extraordinary planet with the most extraordinary cultures. But unfortunately, because of media rhetoric, we are typecasting particular groups in ways that generate hatred towards that group rather than solving the problem, which is why I'm reading from this book. I want the rhetoric to stop, and I want people to awaken to how they escalate conflict. So it goes on to say, to increase your power in all situations, work on your self-esteem. Feel good about who you are. Who you are is not about what you own. It's not about your successes, in actual fact. It's about loving yourself, self-esteem. You could be the poorest person and have self-esteem because you love who you are. You can't love other human beings unless you come to a point of loving yourself. All the great mystics talked of this. Those who are really in alignment with their religions, they garnered that sense of self-esteem from knowing that they are part of creation, that they are equal to all others, and that they have equal value. Ask what is one thing you can do to improve the situation. Work towards power with rather than power over others. Examine your control issues and keep them in check. Even when your position gives you power over others, there is still much you can do to provide a sense of equality for others. Find ways to redirect the agenda to a collaborative approach. So as you can see, even just in that summary, collaboration, sharing power, equality is at the essence of conflict resolution. And as I stated, we're in a world that's seeing itself still, in a sense, it's a uni-power world in the sense that there is one superpower. The former Soviet Union or USSR lost that power, although it has power in areas of nuclear weapons. The conflict, of course, is still continuing as the beliefs have not been deeply questioned on both sides. There has to become a sharing of power in order to coexist in the world. It's not a defeat to share power, it's a success in actual fact. The words I'm getting is it's not about dividing up the world, it's about living in harmony with the world. So let's go through power, because this is what's underlying everything. Power tactics, let's start there. That's a good one. Actually, I might start with manipulation or influence. That's even better. So we're going to go through a fair bit. So I'll try not to interrupt the flow of this. I always have ideas. That's why I often throw in my narrative. It's a 2-column diagram, and it's got manipulation or influence. So let's start there. Manipulation. The manipulator uses the clout of a power base to pressure for a particular outcome. Influence. The influencer only uses their power base to be sure their points are fully considered. Manipulation. The other person is not left free to choose for themselves. Influence. The other person is left free to choose. Manipulation. The other person feels tricked or pressured. Influence. The other person feels persuaded. Manipulation. Input from the other person is discouraged. Influence. Input from the other person is encouraged and valued. Manipulation. Biased information is supplied. Influence. More balanced information is supplied. Manipulation. Needs and concerns of the other person are not seriously considered. Influence. Needs and concerns of the other person are considered. Manipulation. Outcomes favour the manipulator, often at the expense of the other person. Influence. Outcomes favour the other person as well as the influencer. Manipulator generates less commitment from the other person to make the solution work. Influence generates greater commitment from the other person to make the solution work. Manipulator tends to stunt relationships. Influencer tends to build relationships. So you can see the difference here. One is sharing and one is self-interested. You could actually reframe that and say, similarly, self-interest and best interest. And the best interest party is the influencer who is expanding their sphere of influence to include the other. The manipulator is narrowing their sphere of influence to overpower the other, to dominate the other, and to win at the expense of the other. There's really clear energy around this. The difference between influence and manipulation is not black and white. We've all done a little manipulating from time to time. Whether or not it was acceptable depends in part on how positive the outcome was, and also on motive and process. Did everyone benefit in the process? And was that the intention? Were there other people involved free to refuse? Did they know that they were being asked? Were they left free to decide for themselves? The next section here is called stepping stones. What can you do when you notice that you are being manipulated? The purpose of the stepping stones is to create power with rather than power over the other person. Stand up to the manipulator. You need to state your own ideas clearly and firmly. If the manipulator is stuck in worst-case scenarios, shift away from the negatives by moving towards a vision of possibilities. Move from problems towards solutions. If the manipulator is over-optimistic, discuss the possible consequences of the proposed decision. Encourage the flow of information. Point out people's needs that are not being considered. If you can, organise the affected people to speak for themselves. Direct communication is really important, particularly with those who have been affected in a dispute. Like if I go very quickly to New Zealand, to the people in the mosque, it would be to really talk with them and to really listen, actually, because they're going to be in a great deal of pain. And I noticed that the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, I really loved seeing a little excerpt out of the media where she was talking to children, and because some of the children lost other students, and encouraging them to express their feelings. Excuse me. And I noticed a lot of leaders don't do that. She was very sensitive to the emotional needs of the people. And so when you have tragedies like this, what is needed is a speaking to the feeling of others. We don't need manipulation that might turn one party against another. We need to, in a sense, gently influence good outcomes from a very tragic situation, to bring parties together, to build a resolve, to not allow hatred to divide people, to start to see identity as way above even religion. It's, in the case of New Zealand, it would be we're all New Zealanders. In the case of my narrative, it would be we're all humans. That's usually where I feel a sense of identity. We're all one with each other. Power tactics is the next section here. As well as the power bases, which are sources of power, people might use other methods for extra leverage in conflict situations. Most of us at some point have suffered from the manipulative power of the silent treatment or emotional withdrawal, or from the effects of being stood over for physical advantage. Take a moment to sense the manipulative power behind the following tactics: being overcritical, behaving righteously, rebelling, withholding information, backstabbing, refusing to discuss the issue. People might milk their power base in a valued relationship by behaving stubbornly, sulking, crying. So this is obviously more interpersonal, not so much international, but nonetheless, international relationships may have an undercurrent there because we're all human. Other points are collecting allies or withdrawing. So that's building consensus amongst those who are like-minded with you, or withdrawing. I'm not going to talk with you. turning on charm, or seductive behaviours. Some of the ways people use their position, expertise, or ability to reward and punish include being threatening, adopting an adversarial style, dismissing by logic, pulling rank, excluding others from decision-making. Such behaviours don't always start out as a tactic. For example, crying or withdrawing may begin as a knee-jerk reaction, but slip into manipulation if the person has found it successful. What I tend to sense with the resolution of conflict is a balancing of energy. It's very much becoming balanced. We're going to go through intense emotions, and there's a very strong desire to blame the other. There's a very strong desire to seek revenge. Very strong desire, to hit out at that other. And that's why you have to take a step back and really allow yourself to experience what you're experiencing, but without escalating the problem. Here's another set of stepping stones. So what can you do about it? First, noticing the behaviour as a tactic. This is to do with power tactics. Reduce its effects on you. Sometimes naming it as a tactic can take the wind out of the other person's sails. Consider making a statement to someone who is using their tears to manipulate. I can see you are upset. When you've stopped crying, let's discuss the options. To someone who is shouting, do you realise that you're shouting? It is not really persuading me. Or I might say, can you hear that you're shouting? I can hear you, and I feel your pain. Just get it out, and I'll just wait until you're ready to talk. You can reframe it in different ways. Sometimes it will be better to sidestep the tactic, ignore it without being overly hurt. Overwhelmed or vindictive. If you can recognise the unmet need driving the tactic, perhaps you can take it in your stride and redirect the conversation towards positive solutions. Is the person trying to redress a perceived injustice? Are they feeling their status or equality is being threatened? Sometimes you might take a moment to support that value directly. I really am listening to what you have to say. Could address a perceived lack of equality. I hope you're clear that you have my respect. Could lessen the impact of your opposition for a person who feels their status is being undermined. But I would add to that and say be genuine. I do feel a respect for people. For me, it's not words. I do. I feel a respect even if they're very, very different from me. I respect that that's how they feel and that's what they see. And if I can look at that person without judgment, I'm then in a much better position to really hear what they're having to say. And I tend to look for ways to work in harmony with that. They don't have to believe what I believe. But if we start with the respect, it's bound to mirror back because we're all human. Now I'll go on to talk about the power game triangle. We all operate within a variety of power relationships, such as parent-child, child-teacher, employee-boss, male-female. You could also say prime minister, bureaucrat, diplomatic. You might have different power relationships between countries, depending on their rank, their status in their parliament. Are you dealing with the Prime Minister, the President? Are you dealing with the Secretary of State? Are you dealing with trade representatives? What is the power relationship? Is it one of equals or is it one of authority over? So it's best to have communication at levels that are parity so you can get the power situation out of the way. How we operate in these is largely a matter of learning. We've absorbed these from our culture, past experiences and tradition. Transactional analysis defines 3 entrapping behaviours people can easily get caught up in. Persecuting means you persecute someone. You go after a certain group, you persecute them. Now I'm going to add in here, the war on terror has framed it around Muslims. It hasn't framed it in a way that there is violence occurring at this level between groups. We have used labels to call that person a terrorist. It's come from long-term conflicts that have not been resolved, where we label that other in a way that means that they are that, not a human being, not a person who's angry, not a person who is being manipulated by perhaps others. We don't sit down and map the conflict to understand what are the dynamics driving this violence. On the other side, we're not looking at the wars that have happened, particularly within the Middle East. We have not, on balance, looked at those who have been impacted by those wars. What has been the result of those wars, which are very frightening, very distressing, very destructive to the people on the ground, the civilians on the ground. We, as citizens in all countries, have to become more aware of what are the dynamics going on. How can we, as citizens, bring about peaceful outcomes? How can we become mindful of not falling into demonizing language which disempowers groups, as what we've seen with Muslims? That's been very evident. And I can say from personal experience, you know, I actually saw, I believe he was an Australian guy dressed in Islamic dress who was on his mobile, and I noticed other Caucasian Australians looking at him with disdain. They were very critical because of the media narrative that they had heard. They don't know him. He could be talking to his mother. But because of the way he was dressed and because of the way it was portrayed in the media, they drew a conclusion that he must be violent. There was a misunderstanding happening, and I stood at the side watching the misunderstanding. The man on the phone saw, no, actually he didn't see them. Thankfully, he didn't see the prejudice that was being directed. But that prejudice can be overcome, can be educated by non-violence training, by cultural sensitisation. Jane Elliott's work, which I will put on this video, is excellent for looking at how we divide on the basis of characteristics. Now, the same applies also for those who are in religions, who look upon their religion as the only religion, that their word is the only word. This has been a fracture point where great conflicts and wars have arisen historically out of a belief that my way is the only way. I would offer to you the idea that my way is merely another way, or look at God as I do, as love. So when I look through the eyes of love, I can't condemn anyone. I can't dislike anyone. I fully accept people. No one is less than me. No one is superior to me when I love. You see? So the innocence in the people who were looking at that Australian actually dressed in Islamic clothing, they were mistaken. Do we punish them? No, we don't. We educate them. He's innocent. He's just on the phone wearing Islamic dress. There's nothing wrong with that. I didn't see a problem myself. I embraced him like I would anyone. But I've travelled a lot and I've met a lot of people. And I've also, I've met people who are Muslim. I've met people who are Russian. I've met people who are American. I've met people who are Kiwis, New Zealanders, whom I love dearly. I married one. Chinese, I love them. I'm loving the people. The politics is a whole different level, which can utilise and manipulate the belief systems of people to look at another as the enemy. I will not do that because I'm trained in conflict resolution. I know there is no enemy. I know that we have not resolved underlying conflict. We may have negotiated outcomes, but we have not dealt with the unquestioned prejudices that sit beneath the surface, that look at another as somehow problematic or, that they are a threat on some level. So we persecute, is the point being made here. And we believe we're justified in that persecution because they're the bad other. In conflict resolution, the problem needs to be solved. We don't hate people, we solve the problem. So there's a real shift in how that conflict is dealt with. Now, this is talking about the power triangle. So persecuting, rescuing, and being the victim are the three aspects of a power game triangle. Other parties can become rescuers and they form alliances in order to save those people who they see as being victimised. And this is how escalation occurs. So let's go into this. They are behaviours that keep us stuck, replaying a learnt pattern of relating. They may seem to get us what we want in the short term, but in the end will not serve us well. They keep us stuck in pre-programmed behaviour, so we are not free to discover new responses in new situations. So it talks here about persecuting. And I'll just show you the picture because it's good. See the finger? You. The person reacting with a persecuting approach uses aggression to get what they want and to silence the opposition. They may shout or use a forthright tone that allows no argument, or their insistence may appear to be very gentle while hiding an iron fist, or they may demand obedience, relying heavily on rewards, punishments, and their position of authority. Perhaps they behave this way as a form of protection against the discomfort of uncertainty. Now here's the big one, or fear of powerlessness. Now I can reframe this to international level. It can be people come together in very gentle negotiation styles, but there's an iron fist. There may well be an economic blow if this other does not agree to these terms and conditions. There may be contracts signed. So then that other might then feel that it's in their interest to go with that on the basis of the sweetener, rather than staying in integrity and really resolving the underlying problem here. There tends to be narratives in terms of business doing deals. What I'm offering here, if you really want to resolve conflict, deals are forms of manipulation. They are bribes. We kick them out. And we do the really hard work, which is to look that other in the eye honestly and work out how do we solve this problem. If the problem is power, if the problem is greed, if the problem is discrimination, we need to nail it. Now, the United Nations, if there wasn't so much complication going on inside the UN, where so many people are very much manipulating power and doing deals there has to be a new ethos in the United Nations, which has to come from a conflict resolution paradigm where no deals are accepted within that forum. What they do unilaterally between countries is their business after the resolution of conflict. But there has to be no, in my opinion, no bribing whatsoever, because you cannot resolve the underlying conflict if it's all deals. The real issues are much deeper, and that's what is very important to understand. It's much deeper than your interests. In fact, your interests are their interests. We're still operating out of self-interest. It's all about me. It's all about money, and on the balance sheet it looks very simple. But it's not that. You're living in a world where there is great wealth in the coming together and resolving of the conflicts. The unlocking of the potential of diverse cultures in resolving and coming to greater solutions is a real wealth that goes way beyond GDP. But this is not discussed because people are not operating at this level. Most people are operating at a fairly base level. In the case of religion, insults, offence gets taken because their identity is their religion. They've grown up in it. This is their worldview. And of course, they're also learning, the Islam is learning also. It's finding its way as well, in that it has to also learn to live with others. There are things that they're learning through these experiences because they're human. We're all human. We're more similar than different. And that's the big revelation for everyone. So it goes on to say, most of us will have persecuted from time to time. You may not even realize that you have done it. If, for example, you've pushed your point without giving the other person a chance to express theirs, you've succumbed to what we mean here by persecuting behaviour. It is quite different from being assertive. I certainly know I've done that without meaning to. So there's a lot of work in this, in reforming ourselves, actually. Rescuing. People who fall into rescuing approach assume that the other person needs help. They put aside their own needs to focus on fixing things for others. They start from the desire to help someone who seems to be getting a bad deal, which is a thoroughly worthy sentiment. At their best, rescuers give a lot of support to a person in trouble. They'll provide a friendly ear and do all sorts of helpful things, such as do their work or make their choices for them. But the rescuer is caught by an extra motivation. They need to be needed. We can create dependencies by being the one who saves the other party, or a more powerful party could be sitting behind and offering to intervene if that party is further persecuted, let's say. Rescuer is caught by they need to be needed. Therefore, they'll rescue whether the person really needs it or not. So this is not empowering, this is dependency. It may also be that they are highly sensitive to unresolved conflict. They can come addicted to the role and feed off conflict, running from one party to another. It's creating drama in a sense, taking on other people's issues and trying to make it better. They disempower the person who would find their own way through their problems. So not telling people what to do, it's really, well, what do you think about that? Was that true, what that person said? This can happen at diplomatic levels too. Is it true? Do the work of Byron Katie. Can you be absolutely sure that it's true? How do you feel? How do you react when you believe the thought that all of them dislike a certain culture or party or religion? Who would you be without the thought? Turn it around. And where the very judgment that you put on another, wear it yourself. Does it sit with you? Work of Byron Katie is very good because it forces people to go into inquiry on their own belief systems. Simply asking, is it true? Anyone can do it. And the last part's really about projection, and this is judgment. You know, we project onto others what we're not prepared to own. Where have we been persecuting others? Where have we been unfair? You know, where have we terrorised? You know, this is the hard part, is turning the finger that was pointing at the other. What they usually say in conflict resolution, you've got that finger pointing, but these ones are pointing back at you. So whenever you're persecuting someone, you're a this, you're a that, 3 fingers are pointing back. See, the problem with the war on terror is that it's an endless war. You're just saying that it's terror. Well, yes, all war is terror in actual fact. All bullying is terror. Psychological abuse is terror. But how do we solve the problem? We can't just call people terrorists or abusers or bullies. We have to actually look into the dynamics behind why they're doing it. What is the motivation? What do they want? What is the gain? Where is the money? That's, you know, starting to ask questions to get beneath the surface of the conflict is absolutely essential if you want to solve it. Otherwise, we're in revolving conflicts where the media just keep carrying the same byline and persecuting a whole group of people, many, you know, all innocent, apart from, I mean, everybody has bullies in their culture. There's no doubt about it. Everybody has extremism. Every culture has it. So how do we, as civil societies, deal with those extremes? How do we open up dialogue so that people don't get hurt? How do we create a middle ground to de-escalate that potential violence that could be sitting there that's being whipped up by others saying there is the evil other? There is no evil other. It's our thoughts. Gandhi said this as well in India. It's the devils running around in our heads, he said, that were not questioned, which ended up dividing India into India and Pakistan. What he was simply trying to prove, you know, was that they are me. They are like me. He was trying to help people, although at the time they were not ready to hear that message. And that's another thing too. You know, I can bring out ideas through this video, but until a person is really ready to hear it, they're not going to hear my words. And I understand that throughout my own life, there are times when I could not hear the wisdom that was sent to me. I wasn't ready because I hadn't had it in my experience. But let's just keep this for prosperity, and when you're ready to come to it at some point, you might be at a point where you go, yeah, I get it now, or you might take another road, because I'm not going to be holier than thou for everybody. I'm really here to share, to help people so that no one's hurt. So let's continue on. If you've ever put a lot of time and effort into helping a friend or colleague, only to find that they aren't taking on board your helpfulness, which is what I've just talked about, or that they continue asking for your help, chances are you've been rescuing, you know, maybe I'm rescuing the world, and you're very likely to end up feeling used. Moreover, the helped person may well turn against you as they struggle to claim their own power. That's true too, they'll blame you because they haven't questioned their thinking. That's always a risk whenever you come in as a peacemaker too, they'll end up blaming you. Never mind, that's all right, it comes with the territory. Being a victim. In recognising the victim behaviours, it is important first to distinguish genuine victims of circumstances from people playing the victim as a social role based on a sense of inadequacy. Real victims who suffer from hardship, injustice or accident naturally deserve care and sympathy. I would say empathy, drop sympathy. Sympathy is not the right one. They need support until they can manage on their own. Of course, you will give support to a friend or colleague going through a rough patch. You'll know it is a good thing to do because you'll see results. They're saying here sympathy is needed when a friend is sick or suffering a loss. Yeah, I don't tend to go with that. Empathy means I don't feel sorry for people. Empathy is I feel what you may be going through because I've felt it before. the reason I don't feel sorry is because I know great lessons are coming out of the greatest conflict actually brings the greatest wisdom. There's no doubt that some of the, if you look at some of the Sufi songs, they come from great pain, but there's great love that emerges. There's great wisdom that comes from conflict. So I can never say I'm sorry for you, because I understand that this is an experience that's coming to you, for you. We're here to learn from these things, as painful as they are. And I've been through a lot myself, don't worry. It's coming from experience. So it's normal and it's healthy to need help, it's saying here, and this and advice or empathy at such times. And this, of course, would be the people who have suffered the losses in New Zealand. I would also extend that to the people who've suffered the losses in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Balkans, in the Israeli-Palestinian dispute, the suffering there. Looking at Syria, of course, and spilling it over into Turkey as well. There's, this is a really, a lot of people are feeling that they've done nothing to deserve this horrendous violence that's been visited upon them. My first feeling there was Allah and love. And it's extremely hard to forgive the other party when you've suffered such losses and pain. Eventually you come to the point where to forgive is not to condone it, it's to simply say that what has happened has happened. It's very powerful to forgive another. And actually, when they know they've been forgiven, it changes them. It's a very powerful statement, it's forgiveness. And that's where you can go deeper into faith. Mercy. I really feel to send a lot of love to those suffering, no matter who they are. I see it as global as well. Just know that you're not alone, and there are people that do love in the world. So it's not the same situation as a person with a victim attitude who gives their power away to others. Some people are perpetual victims because they're seeking to trade on it. They see others as being powerful while they are not. They feel helpless. They stay stuck in inappropriate situations and blame others for their situation. This is sort of more to do with regular conflicts in society. They focus on how bad and hopeless it all is, and what's not working rather than what is. You can become despondent, particularly when you feel you have no power. How do you get out of this situation? You may feel you never can, and if you're feeling very depressed, it's very hard to rise from that. You have to move through that deep sorrow. Depression can often come from suppression of emotions. That's why emotional expression is incredibly important for healing, and it's also very important for conflict resolution, the resolution of conflict. So it goes on to say they regularly accumulate new dramas. So this is your victim type person who's constantly creating dramas in their lives and seem to attract accidents, mischance and illness. There is little action on finding their way out of their difficulties, though there may be a lot of talk. The trap and the tragedy lie in the ingrained attitudes of self-defeat. People can also identify as a victim and stay in that victim status and continue to tell the story without finding pathways out of that. What did I learn would be a pathway out of that? I survived. I learned a lot about what could be better in a future instance. This is how you grow. We're here to grow, not stay stuck. And that means welcoming in new ideas, welcoming in new ways of dealing with conflict. So I'm going to go on to read a little bit more, how the power game starts and continues. Sometimes you can play out the victim, persecuting and rescuing roles on your own. Sometimes a 2- or 3-way manipulation is going on. Victims might be walking around with their rescue me or pick on me badges shining. It is easy to be drawn in if you are not aware, and the rescuing and persecuting keeps the victim stuck. What I would say in relationship to that is, if people think you're vulnerable, now if we're looking at poverty, for example, others can perceive that as vulnerable, that they can't defend themselves. Now, I've seen this in many aspects, not just poverty. I've seen it in gender, status, where they think that you're vulnerable, and there's something within them that wants to take advantage of that. Ignorance is another way of keeping people vulnerable. If you don't know, you don't know. And typically that's used to do that. So the person, can be picked on or bullied or persecuted as a result of them being perceived as unable to defend themselves. They're unarmed, for example. Women and children, It goes on to talk about they are a perfect match. So it's talking about the rescuing, persecuting keeps the victim stuck. Victim behaviour gets rewarded with lots of care and attention, especially if they can hook in a dedicated rescuer. They're a perfect match until one of them sees the light. The rescuer and the victim ganging up together trap the persecutor in the role of enemy. And this can also be seen at the international level, where others come together in what we call in conflict resolution glee clubs, but they would be alliances of sorts where they're identifying with the other party as themselves. Turkey would be an example of identifying, rescuing, feeling a sense of responsibility for fellow Muslims that have been harmed. Then they might see Australia as the enemy, which they would. And of course that becomes the mirror to Australia, because it's also carried the narrative of the war on terror, which has been framed around Muslims. So that's where the flashpoint is in both seeing each other as an enemy when they're not. There's a circumstance that's happened, there's a problem that's occurred because narratives have been stated and things have been believed about another party which are untrue. Those people in the mosque were completely innocent people. One can label them a this or a that, but they are innocent people who are simply just praying. Such is the power of projection. You have to be very, very careful of the power of projection, where you start to see people as the enemy and they're just simply having a cup of tea. Byron Katie talks about it as looking without a story, and I do it myself. I do not look with a story, and I check myself. I still can forget at times because I've grown up in a culture, but because of my training, I will look at someone and see a person having a cup of tea without any narrative or story around it. They are a Muslim, they are a man, they are, homeless, they are whatever they are. That's the projection. So explaining that would be like if you imagine a picture theatre. There is film being projected onto that screen. So this is the screen, okay? If I can, it's hard doing it. I'm trying to. Here we go. I'm mastering this. There is a screen. Now, the mind is the projector that's projecting an image onto that screen. Now, you can look at me, for example. You will see woman, blue eyes. You might see what I'm wearing, Western, Australian with my accent, speaking English. Now, you might draw a conclusion around that. But if you were looking at me without a story, Woman talking. That's it. That's no projection. Woman talking. Can you feel the silence around that? Can you feel the noise around projection? They're all the thoughts in your head that keep telling you this, that, and the other about the other. None of it's true. Why is that? Because every moment is different. We might keep repeating the same stories which continue the narrative, the story. But when we go into stillness, like what I often do in my videos, I'm moving out of the story. Instead of identifying in any way, I'm actually going into truth. And in fact, what is truth? It's not words running around in my head. I get pictures. Thoughts quickly flash in. Peace is to live without a story. Forgiveness is to drop the story. What has happened has happened. Forgiveness is to trust that higher power, actually, because there are no mistakes. Life is here to teach us about each other. It is to bring the family together, in actual fact. And certainly what I saw out of what happened in New Zealand was a great outpouring of love for Muslim people, which is the truth. Isn't that lovely? I was so happy when I saw that, all the flowers. I see it for every culture and every religion. Beneath the surface, we love each other. All of us love each other, no matter who you are. I know that as a clown when I clowned on the streets. I saw everybody as myself. Everybody. There was no story. I didn't have time for a story. I just was loving everyone, getting to know them. Now these days we're all on iPhones. We're all disconnecting from each other and we're getting caught up in the illusion of other stories that are coming to our feed. None of it's true. Yes, events happen. Yes, there are stories around those events, but what wisdom are we gleaning from these situations? What are you learning about yourself? Can you look for the good in the darkest of situations? For me, I was really happy to see people's coming together and dropping the story of separation between New Zealand people in general and this group called Muslims. Because as humans, they felt their pain. As humans, they saw them as part of their group. They showed deep compassion. And here in Australia, there's been Australians visiting mosques. The mosques are opening their doors. Can you imagine the joy of the people when they're seeing the Australians coming to their mosques? This is the Australian people. We're not talking about those who have an interest in division. We're talking about ordinary people visiting those mosques to let those people know that we care. They're not joining Islam necessarily. Some might. Majority are going there to say, I'm joining with you in respect, that this is your faith. I'm here to be your friend. That's love. That's, I think, a higher power at work, bringing us all together. Because there are definite forces on this planet seeking to divide us. We are not to succumb to the division. We are to come together now and find the peace that was always there, that's been manipulated by others who don't want it for their own vested interests. And I send them love too, because they're mistaken. So I'll go down a little bit. As adults, we can fall into a power game behaviours when our buttons are pushed by an issue on which we're easily inflamed or hurt, particularly varieties of abuse. Will bring out the rescuer in us. When we meet incompetence or a perceived lack of respect, it might be our trigger for a persecuting reaction. Dictatorial teachers, bosses, and systems can scare people into a return of the victim state of their childhood. People in victim roles can keep others around them stuck in victimhood also. We see this when habits of blaming and complaining are rife between couples or in work groups. Now I want to show you these triangles. This is the power game triangle, you see? Persecutor, rescuer, and victim is that triangle. Now, beneath here is the empowerment circle. So consult and lead others. This is mediate, facilitate, and coach. Down here, it's learn, take responsibility, self-empower. So I'll just get a bit closer so you can see. I'll move this lamp out of the way. We want the circle, not the triangle, in the world. World Peaceful Empowerment is about that. So I'm going to start with the power triangle. So persecutor, coercive power, that's how you recognise it. Uses aggression to silence opposition. You'll do it my way, I'm right, you're wrong. It's got to be your fault. I'll show you who's in charge here. Pay off, short term, often get what they want, feel powerful, in control. Cost, long term, relationships out of balance, alienation, lack of commitment from other people who will undermine. Rescuer, manipulative power. Other people are inadequate, often offers unwelcome or uninvited help, puts other people's needs before their own. Others can't function without my help, so they become dependent. Puts other people's, I'll do it for you. So they're always getting in there. Pay off short term, feeling needed and a worthwhile person or group or friend. Cost long term, often ends up rejected or used, burnt out, own needs not met. So they're in other people's business. You've got to be careful not to get into other people's business. Your business is your own. The universal higher order is, in a sense, that high power's interests. But that's another story. The victim is inadequate power. Some convert power to draw in help. Very dependent, very dependent. There's always another drama. Other people or circumstances are doing this to me. There's nothing I can do to sort this out. Payoff short term is sympathy and attention. Don't have to take responsibility. Less scary to complain than to act. Cost of a long term is unhappy, low self-esteem. Life doesn't move forward. Other people get sick of helping. I certainly know some people in that category. So going to the empowerment circle, which is really us as a world. I see this as the world. This is the world. It's where we're going, I think, with all this upheaval that's happening. We have choices. We can either go into the power game triangle, continue that, and that's very destructive, or we can go to empowerment. So consult, lead, empower others is show what you consider will work best for everyone and explain why. Invite and respect the other person's point of view. Give up threatening, blaming, and sulking. The next one here is this one here. Mediate, facilitate, coach, encourage people to settle their differences. Support people in helping themselves. Look at the wider context and see how much help is and is not appropriate. Learn, take responsibility, self-empower, use even the most difficult situation as a learning opportunity. We're here to learn. That's growth. Avoid negative self-talk and disempowering language. Start with one thing that will make a positive difference. Celebrate your growing ability to stand up for yourself. So we're here to learn. Often we're seeing repeating patterns globally because they are not changing the way they dialogue. They are not addressing the underlying power dynamics that have been here for a long time. Are they working? Some are co-opting political processes in order to gain advantage, where their interests are all that matter and they forget the whole social impact of decisions that are made because they separate from the society or societies that they're seeking to gain an advantage from. But ultimately, we're all in this together. Ultimately, what goes around comes around. What you put out comes back. See, what's not understood is we're not islands of automation here. We are all connected. So what you do to another returns to the self is a truism. And that's something I repeat a lot in my videos to try and help those to understand that self-interest doesn't work. It might have a short-term bounty or booty, but ultimately it can't work because we're part of the one system. Those energy dynamics have feedback loops, comes back on you. And that's, I think, what we're seeing today is the consequence of decisions that have been made in the past where self-interest has been involved, where there's been economic aspects, persecuting approaches, seeking to disempower another and not influence through the sharing of power. And of course, power, or the oil issue, energy industry is also part of this. It's not separate. It's all part of the one thing. But if we drill down, if I may use that interesting terminology, if we drill down, we see that the insecurity is driving this push to control resources because we see economics as power rather than sharing diversity as the real power. Powerlessness, seeking power, can never achieve power because the foundation of it is powerlessness. It's not outside of you. The power is not outside of you, it is within you. That's why we said, or it was stated in here, power with or power over. What I state is power within or power over. I learned this very long ago in poetry, that the power within was the real power, to know thyself and be true, to embody a real felt experience of love for others, even those you don't know, as part of a global family, is that empowerment circle. Because we're all one, we're all connected, and it's in our interests to care about the whole. So on that note, I will love you and leave you. I will send love again to everyone, those who suffered in New Zealand. I also send love to my government. May it find the wisdom on how to deal with the growing debate on extremism, how we will reconnect with the true meaning of democracy, which is similar to the empowerment circle. dominator economics is more akin to dictatorial, persecutorial type triangle that we saw. That's the triangle. So I send great love and wisdom to my own government. May they find their way with this, because this is a teaching for them too. And I also send love to Turkey and Syria and all the other countries that have gone through great sorrow and hardship. My love is with them. And for all those others that are feeling powerlessness and seeking to influence world events through violence, what I say to you is that what you put out returns, but I send love to you as well, because I know you're feeling powerless and you're thinking this is the way. It's a zero-sum game. It's not going to work. We really are at a real choice point in human history now where we have to discard the violence. We have to move into spaces of collaboration that truly are underlined with values and respect, universal values that everyone shares. We're at a precipice of great change. I hope this has been of benefit. Thank you. Bye.